And welcome back, Dean Obeidallah Show. We're live here Thursday, June 6th. If people on hold, I'll try to take calls in between the guests. But right now, really happy to have with us here live our friend Glenn Kirschner, former 30-year prosecutor, served in the U.S. Army and JAG Corps. You see him as a legal analyst on NBC, MSNBC. His YouTube channel is Just Matters with Glenn Kirschner. Glenn, nice to see you, my friend.
Hey, Dean, good to be with you.
Justice came last week to Donald Trump and visited him 34 times, like the ghost of Christmas future, ghost of crime future. Just what was your reaction when you heard Donald Trump convicted of all 34 felonies?
Not surprised because, I think, Dean, you and I have talked about the fact that once these cases move from the court of public opinion, where Donald Trump lies all day, every day, and deceives at least the gullible, once they move into a court of law, he's done because of the rules of evidence, the rules of procedure, and the rules of law. And we saw that in living color after a several weeks long trial. The jury needed less than 2 days of deliberations. They convicted him in a New York minute. And now we'll turn our attention to sentencing come July 11. And I know we're going to be talking about that.
Sure. So let's talk about that in a second. With July 11th, as of now, the sentencing, it could change, but that's the date. When you look at the case, when you look at Donald Trump, 34 felonies, the person that he is, what would be a fair sentence, fair punishment for someone like Donald Trump?
I would say 2 to 4 years in prison. Let's not forget, this was not him falsifying business records to cheat on his taxes. This was him falsifying business records to cheat in a presidential election. He cheated, he won, he robbed the American voters of the full value of their vote, and that needs to be punished. Two of the most important principles of sentencing, Dean, as you well know, are specific deterrence and general deterrence. Specific deterrence means you punish the wrongdoer so you will deter him from continuing to do wrong. General deterrence, which is even more important, I think, in the context of this case, is you send the message to all aspiring day one dictators who want to replicate what Donald Trump did in 2016 or 2020 and what he's preparing to do in 2024. You have to deter that kind of conduct. And the only way to deter it is by punishing the person who was caught doing it, who was convicted for doing it by a jury of his peers 34 times. If we really are interested in fighting for our democracy and keeping our republic, you have to punish somebody who tried to steal a presidential election. And so help me, Dean, if I hear home detention, I'm going to lose my ever-loving mind, because home detention is sentencing Donald Trump to binge watch Netflix, order DoorDash. It is a damn vacation for him. Far easier than going around the country holding his hate rallies. I believe Judge Merchan understands and appreciates all of that. And perhaps most importantly, Dean, I've done hundreds and hundreds of sentencing hearings in my 30 years as a prosecutor. Every judge looks to the defendant to see if they accept responsibility for their crime, if they show remorse, and if they pledge not to do it again. I want to be a better man. Donald Trump will absolutely not take responsibility. He said it before. I take no responsibility at all. Taking responsibility is the first step on the road to rehabilitation. And if he won't take that first step, then he needs to have his butt marched right into a jail cell.
And not only has Trump not shown remorse, he's shown contempt for the proceedings. He's walked out of the courtroom, and the very next day had a press conference. It's a sham. He said the jury verdict is a sham. He said the real verdict will be November 5th. He's attacked the judge. He attacked the prosecutor. Have you ever had a defendant in a case that you prosecuted show this much contempt for the entire system? And then what happened if you did?
Yeah, I've had a couple of defendants, one RICO defendant and one murder defendant. The murder defendant was literally flipping the bird to the jury as soon as the jury convicted him, and he was hustled out. I've had a RICO defendant literally jump up and rip his jacket off and start yelling and screaming at the jury during my closing argument, showed real contempt for the prosecutors, the jury, and the judge. It doesn't typically end well for the defendant.
Have you ever seen someone like now post-verdict? You mentioned that the one guy yelling and giving the finger, but repeatedly going public having press conferences to denounce the court, the system, and saying he did nothing wrong, which saying you did nothing wrong is one thing. You could try to say I'm innocent for appellate process, whatever. This is different. This is contempt for the system. And how significant is that for a judge in terms of sentencing? And could you explain why? So people don't know. Everyone keeps saying remorse, remorse. Why is showing remorse important?
Because, it shows that you have some rehabilitative potential. There is at least some chance you're going to learn from the crimes you committed. You're going to try to do better. One of the reasons we punish offenders is to vindicate the rights of the victims, and the people of New York, and by extension, all American voters, are the victims of these crimes in a very real sense, and to protect the community. Dean, thus far, all institutions of government have struck the balance against protecting jurors, witnesses, judges, their staff, their family members, prosecutors, everybody who was involved in the endeavor of trying to hold Donald Trump accountable for their crimes. We've sacrificed the safety of all of those people to one man, Donald Trump. And we have, with some exceptions, some limited gag orders, we have allowed him to engage in dangerous, violence-inducing rhetoric, calls to violence, and his followers respond by swatting and doxing and harassing and threatening witnesses, jurors, et cetera, et cetera. Come sentencing time, that calculation must change. It's time to now protect the witnesses, the jurors, and everybody else from Donald Trump's dangerous, violence-inducing rhetoric by putting him in prison. He will begin to recede into the cell block, right? And then new aspiring dictators will pop up in his place. But it's time to punish him, hold him accountable for his crimes, vindicate the rights of victims, protect the community, none of which has been done to date. But I think it's about to be done on July 11th by Judge Merchan.
I'm chatting with our friend Glenn Kirschner. Glenn, can you think of a case where someone was convicted of 34 felonies and did not get any jail time?
Well, here's what I will say, Dean. I don't think we treat white-collar offenders seriously enough. If you snatch a purse, you sell a rock of crack, and you have no connections, no influence, no wealth, no privilege, we're probably going to throw you in jail. The system is. But, if you're a billionaire and you commit white-collar crimes, you defraud large swaths of the American people out of their, for example, life savings, you may end up in home detention, which, as I've said, is no kind of punishment. So, yes, I have seen some horrifically lenient sentences in the white-collar context, but not when somebody has tried to steal an American election and then really violently endangered everyone who tried to hold him accountable. That I've never seen.
And, the point you made earlier is a point I keep trying to make. Donald Trump is convicted of felonies for cheating in the 2016 election. He is charged with crimes for trying to cheat in the 2020 election and remain in power after losing. There is zero doubt if he is free, he will cheat and commit more crimes to try to win 2024. In fact, he is probably more dangerous now because he knows he's not the Teflon Don anymore. He knows he will be convicted in those other cases, and he will, like John Gotti, likely die in jail. Does the fact that he's that dangerous, does that factor into the judge? Is that a fair character trait for a judge to consider?
Absolutely. The danger that an offender presents, I think, is one of the most important sentencing considerations that a judge has available to him or her. I mean, this whole system, this whole criminal justice system is ultimately about protecting the community, protecting the victims against offenders. And Donald Trump is probably the single most dangerous offender in the United States because of, his determination to kill all institutions of government and to have himself reign as a day one dictator, his words. So listen, nobody will be safe from Donald Trump, not his enemies and not even his allies, who he turns on his allies over and over and over and over and over again. Not sure how foolish you have to be to continue to hitch your wagon to Donald Trump, because as Rick Wilson famously, the title of his book, everything Trump touches dies. And that is pretty much true. And why people are still kind of drawn to his power, like a moth to a flame. They want to be in his proximity. They're going to get burned, and he's going to turn on them. So listen, I think we've had a really good stretch. I was in court today in Washington, D.C., and I watched a judge order at long last Steve Bannon to report to the Federal Bureau of Prisons to begin serving his sentence. We've got Peter Navarro serving his prison term. We've got Donald Trump about to be sentenced on July 11. I feel like accountability is trending at the moment. We're not going to count our chickens because there's a lot of stuff going on in Florida and in the Supreme Court and in Georgia that is not particularly encouraging, but I still feel like we are trending in the direction of accountability.
So, and I'm glad you brought up Steve Bannon. I want to get to that in a second, but taking a page from Steve Bannon, what is the likelihood that Judge Merchan would sentence Trump to some type of incarceration penalty, whatever it could be, home confinement for a period of time or going to jail, and then staying the execution of that for him to appeal the same way Steve Bannon was able to?
Yeah, great question, because I think the first question, I tend to agree with you if you're suggesting that Judge Merchan will sentence him to a period of incarceration. I believe he will. Don't forget, during the course of the trial, he committed 10 criminal contempt of court crimes and was convicted beyond a reasonable doubt by Judge Merchan in what was a summary bench trial. He could have gotten 30 days for each of those criminal convictions. And frankly, he continues to do it. And we may have another discussion in the near future about whether Donald Trump should be convicted of more criminal contempt of court charges. But I think Judge Merchan will absolutely impose a prison term. But your next question is really the $64,000 question. Will he stay it pending appeal or not? I don't happen to believe he will. I could be dead wrong about that. It may be a coin toss as to whether he will or not. If he does not stay it, if he orders him into confinement, Donald Trump will file an emergency request with the appeals court to try to get a stay from that court. So I don't know. I'm loath to predict it because I think, it's a complete toss up at this point.
And so let's turn to Steve Bannon. So you were in the court today. What can you share? What was it like in the courtroom? Steve Bannon's there with his lawyer. When I read some of the exchange between the lawyer and the judge, and it was a Trump appointed judge, did it get heated? It seemed, I can't really tell from the print, but it seems like the judge, like, you should know when you've lost the case and don't yell at me, that kind of stuff. What happened in the courtroom?
Yeah, remarkable. So I know people on both sides of the bar. John Crabb was the prosecutor with whom I worked for many, many years at the U.S. Attorney's Office. Evan Corcoran, one of the defense attorneys, who didn't take the lead. It was Bruce Schoen who took the lead today. Right. But I worked murder cases with Evan back in the day. So I know the players. And actually, the arguments were pretty respectful, both from the prosecutor and from the defense. But boy, as I was listening to Judge Carl Nichols, a Trump appointee, kind of think out loud and talk through the various issues that he had to make his way through before he ultimately ruled, everybody was on the edge of their seat because he seemed to be going one way, he seemed to be going the other way. And then at the end, he said, because the appeals court unanimously rejected your appeal and affirmed your conviction, I can no longer hang my hat on the belief that you might have a winning legal issue on appeal because that's been shot down. So now I no longer have a reason to leave you out. You are being ordered to the Bureau of Prisons no later than July 1 to begin serving your sentence. And I'll tell you, I was hustling out of the courtroom so I could quickly tell MSNBC, who had me there covering it, what had just happened. But then I kind of stopped because Bruce Schoen sprinted up to the lectern, and you don't do that. You wait until you're invited to the lectern by the federal judge. And he started yelling. I could hear him as I was leaving the courtroom. He got angry. He got animated. And I have some of the quotes from the people who were in the courtroom. Judge Nichols said, one thing you have to learn as a lawyer is that when a judge has made his decision, you don't stand up and start yelling. I've had enough. Schoen said, I'm not yelling. I'm passionate. He said, and he then said, I think you should sit down. I mean, and that is not the way an attorney should behave in court just because he lost and he may be angry and he wants to put a show on for his client, or maybe the criminal fish above his client. It was really unbefitting, unbecoming a member of the bar. But, that is what the folks who gravitate toward Team Trump typically end up doing in one way or another. I didn't see much of a reaction from Steve Bannon. He said his piece, to the cameras outside the courtroom. But it's pretty clear that accountability is finally coming to some of these people for just some of the crimes they've committed.
So I assume that Bannon will appeal to the U.S. Court of Appeals, which already shot down his argument. So I think that's done. His only real hope is the Supreme Court. What do you think the chances are? I know Navarro tried and he lost there. Peter Navarro tried to have the Supreme Court stay him going to jail, and they didn't get involved. And he's in jail right now, Peter Navarro.
Yeah, I would like to say his success at winning before the Supreme Court is kind of much like Blutarski's grade point average in Animal House 0.0. However, this is the Supreme Court, right? This is Alito, who throws in his lot with insurrectionists, and Thomas, who is willing to take, money from any Republican billionaire who, looks his way. I don't know. Might they want to do Steve Bannon a solid? I think it's very unlikely, because they didn't accept review of Navarro's conviction for identical crimes, right? 2 counts of contempt of Congress. Now, the two raised slightly different issues in the trial court during their defense, so there's still something the Supreme Court could hang its hat on. I think it extraordinarily unlikely that the D.C. Federal Circuit Court of Appeals will grant en banc review, which is still something that Bannon will request. That will be rejected. I don't think the Supreme Court accepts review of the case, but with the Alitos and the Gorsuches and the Thomases, you can't really place a bet on what the Supreme Court might do.
In federal prison, will Steve Bannon have podcast privileges? Does that exist?
No,
it
doesn't. And one of the things, and Bannon, I think on the courthouse steps said, no, prison can shut me up. Actually, Steve, you're wrong. I've been in lots and lots of prisons, both military and civilian, both federal, state, and local. They actually can shut you up. When I had inmates who were endangering folks in the community, like sending covert messages to their associates out in the street that, hey, I think I know who the witness is. You might want to have a talk with them. Guess what? We shut them up. More precisely, we provided that information to the warden of the facility, and we said, please take whatever steps you believe are appropriate, and to protect the community and the integrity of an investigation or a prosecution, they would shut that person up. No outside communication whatsoever. We can shut people up, and we have shut people up in prison when it's the right thing to do on the public safety front.
It's very interesting. I'm chatting with our friend Glenn Kirschner. So, Glenn, let's shift gears here for the last few minutes. Judge Aileen Cannon, the Trump-owned judge who is auditioning to be on the Supreme Court or the Court of Appeals, is now going to have a hearing in 2 weeks on whether Jack Smith was legitimately appointed, and not only, which has been litigated all over the country already. Not only that, she's going to allow non-parties, lawyers for non-parties, to argue like it's an open mic night for lawyers. I come from the comedy world. I've been open mics. You don't usually have them for lawyers before the bar. What is happening here?
What's happening is Judge Cannon continues to prove the point that her impartiality might reasonably be questioned, which is the precise language of the federal law, 28 U.S.C. 455, that requires her to disqualify herself. It says any justice. Interestingly, the federal law applies to Supreme Court justices. Any justice, judge, or magistrate judge, which is like a low-level federal judge, whose impartiality might reasonably be questioned, low bar, shall disqualify themselves. She's in violation of that federal law, and she proves it every single day. She asked the parties, Dean, to propose trial dates a few months back. Jack Smith said July 8th. Donald Trump's lawyers said August 12th. And in response, she should have set August 12th. She said, no, I will be setting no trial date, nor will I be resolving motions in a timely manner. She didn't say the second thing. She said the first thing, right, but she did the second thing. And I think she's disqualified herself several times over. She's not going to move this case to trial. She, as you say, is having an open mic night. I like that. I might steal it and even give you attribution. To have uninvolved people come in and argue why they don't think Jack Smith should be prosecuting Donald Trump. That is institutional insanity. I never had that happen in 30 years as a trial court prosecutor. I'm not saying it's never happened in the trial court, but it's almost never happened in the trial court. It rarely happens in the appeals courts, where you more frequently see amicus, friend of the court briefs.
Right.
So, this is just a special kind of judicial insanity. She really has no business presiding over this case.
No. And I'm sure Jack Smith regrets, if he could have really brought it in DC, and if it could have been venued there, venuing it there. But now he's stuck for the time being until perhaps he can make a motion to accuse her, but that she still gets what she really wanted, is delaying the case beyond the election. So the last thing is Supreme Court. Before you came on, I went on earlier in the show and explained to people, reminded them that in the 14th Amendment case, which we talked about at great length, within 3 weeks of the oral argument, they gave a decision on a case of first impression. No one had ever brought that case before, disqualifying a presidential candidate, but they wanted to move quickly, the GOP Supreme Court justices, because Trump had been in the Colorado court barred from the ballot. Now we're 7 weeks since April 25th, and we have no idea when we're going to get an opinion on the January 6th case if Trump is immune, meaning he can commit all the crimes he wants. Is this slow walking to help Trump? And when do you think we get an opinion? Is it going to be the very last day of the term?
Yeah, Dean, as you say, in the 14th Amendment disqualification case, Donald Trump is an adjudicated insurrectionist by both the trial court judge in Colorado and the Colorado Supreme Court. And the express language of the Constitution says, if you engage in insurrection after taking an oath to support the Constitution, you are disqualified by operation of the Constitution, period.
Right.
And notwithstanding the express language, the Supreme Court hustled itself to Donald Trump's defense and said, ignore the Constitution, keep him on the ballot. Now, when the Constitution says, even when somebody is impeached by the House and convicted in the Senate, they can still be prosecuted for the same conduct, and the president has the duty to faithfully execute the laws of the country. The Constitution makes clear that a president does not have immunity against criminal prosecution, and I have zero confidence that the Supreme Court will so rule. What I am pretty confident they're going to do, Dean, and I hate to even say it, they're going to send it back to Judge Chutkan. They're going to say, hold endless evidentiary hearings to see if any of what he did might enjoy some kind of outer perimeter immunity, kind of dancing around the edge, little light trees and dancing around the edges might be okay, right? So they've blown it. They've blown it for the American people. They've blown it for our free and fair elections. They've blown it for our ability to keep our republic. And they're paving the way for Donald Trump to be in a position to steal the 2024 election. And when he loses, he's going to resort to violence again. We've seen this movie before. And now in a supporting role in this movie, Supreme Court.
It's heartbreaking. And the last minute here, Glenn, I mean, you served in the U.S. Army. Today's the 80th anniversary of the brave thousands of people on D-Day. President Biden was there in Normandy, and he touched on democracy. Does it resonate more when you look at the fight against fascism there and what we're dealing with today in the United States of America, that we're faced with Donald Trump and MAGA, which is, academically speaking, an anti-democratic fascist movement?
Yeah, anti-democratic. It's a cult. And, I am never prepared to walk away from my fellow Americans who have been sucked in to a cult for whatever reason.
Oh, you're back. He's back.
I'm back.
All right.
Sorry, I don't know what happened, Dean. I don't know what happened.
So just at the last minute, you were saying you're never going to walk away from your fellow Americans. We'll take it from there. Pick it up from there, my friend.
And here's why, right? There are people who are in Donald Trump's cult, right? And whether it's because they're unwilling or unable to sort of separate fact from fiction is almost beside the point. What do we do when our friends and our family members and our neighbors get sucked into a dangerous cult? We try to help them. We try to help them with empathy and determination. I'm never going to walk away from my fellow Americans who are stuck in this dang cult, because Donald Trump has been very successful in lying to and recruiting these cult members. But we're going to come out the other end, right? We're not going to lose our democracy to the likes of Donald Trump and his lackeys. We're just not. They're going to make it very painful in the interim, but we're going to win the election in November. We're going to get out to vote in numbers too big to rig and too real to steal. And we're going to keep our republic, but we're still going to have to try to reach out to the folks who are in Donald Trump's cult and help them. That's what we do to people who are at risk. I know it can be challenging and maddening. I get the hate just spewed at me every day from the MAGA factions, but I'm not walking away from our fellow Americans because they're in danger. They need our help. And that's the best of America, in my opinion.
Well, Glenn, I appreciate it. Thanks so much for being on. Check out Glenn's YouTube channel, Justice Matters with Glenn Kirschner. Anything else you want to plug before we let you go?
No, all good, Dean. Just great being with you.
The cruise is sold out. Frank was on. He told me the cruise is sold out, so you got that done. Frank got a bunch of merch. You have to get something, Glenn. Frank's got everything: sneakers, hats, whatever.
Yeah.
Fake guns.
Can I tell you, Dean? When I got a phone call from Frank Figliuzzi saying, "Hear me out. Do you want to co-host the Justice Theme Mediterranean cruise?" And I said, "Who is this? This is not Frank." And he talked me into it, and we're going to have a heck of a lot of fun.
That's good. Sold out. Thanks, Glenn. Thanks so much for spending